Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Matty here, and today we're talking win rates. Which decks so far in this format after the first week have the highest average win rate in these online competitions out of all of the top decks in the format? That's what we're going to take a look at. Today we have 8 of the top highest win rates amongst the most played, most popular decks of the format. A couple caveats, things to really understand in this video is that, win rates aren't really the end-all be-all. There's a lot of different factors that go into why a deck might have a higher win rate than the other, but it is definitely a really useful statistic, and I think that, as a very small, as a general baseline, I think looking at a deck's average win rate, especially if the sample size is large enough, it's definitely an important statistic, and I think the sample size now after 1 week and about 10,000 matches of data here on the Limitless platform, I think we have plenty of data to really go ahead and take a look at what decks have the highest win rate so far in the Shining Revelry format. So 8 different decks here. I'm not including some particular random decks that have only had 10 matches played but have a really good win rate. We're kind of keeping things amongst sort of the top 15 most played decks because I think those are the decks that have at least a large enough sample size to quantify and qualify the data that we're taking a look at today. So number 8 on this list is going to be Gallade and Hitmonlee, as we see right here on the screen. So Gallade and Hitmonlee is actually the 3rd most played deck of this format so far, and it has a 51.83% win rate, 1,092 wins, 987 losses, and 28 ties. So let's go ahead and take a look at, just an example of a top placing Gallade so far of this format. Gallade is a really, really good deck. We're going to see actually another fighting type deck here on the list later on, but Gallade is extremely good for a lot of reasons. I think that the main only downside, I think, in my opinion, of Gallade right now in the format is that Mewtwo is becoming increasingly popular, so it's kind of tough to reliably do enough damage with Gallade against Mewtwo. Mewtwo also hits for weakness on Gallade, so even with Red and Giant Cape, we're able to get one-hit KO'd by Mewtwo, so keep that in mind. Giratina is also hitting us for weakness, so no Giant Cape in this list is a little bit scary, but Gallade does have a lot of HP, so very useful in other matchups. Of course, we're heavily utilizing Hitmonlee and Marshadow, a really, really strong combination in the format right now. Iono does make some of these evolution decks a little bit more consistent, so we're running one Iono and then, of course, Pokemon Communication. So, this is a Stage 2 deck, so it's going to have its consistency problems, even though it does have really strong leadoff Pokemon. Gallade as well, it's a Stage 2 Pokemon, similar to Meowscarada. It's got more HP, it's an EX Pokemon, and Meowscarada is not, but it has 2 energies in its attack cost, which is very relevant. Basically, all of the relevant Stage 2 attacking Pokemon have either 2 energies or 1 energy in their attack cost. So I think Gallade is really, really good. I think it's well positioned. Again, I would say the only thing that is holding Gallade back from a win rate perspective, at least over the last week or so, has been Mewtwo seeing a lot more play. And kind of really being on the rise. I have Mewtwo pretty high up as my top deck of the format. I did put it in S tier after, this past week's Ursa Days tournament, but, that might change. But either way, I think Gallade is an incredible choice right now, and I think that Hitmonlee is extremely well positioned, and like I said, I think this deck has a lot going for it. I love Gallade, but as someone who's playing a lot of Mewtwo in ranked battles, I actually really love going against Gallade as well. Gallade is super strong, a very, very good deck, and almost a 52% win rate is very respectable in the format right now. We have great matchups against Gyarados, again, because of that Hitmonlee situations, and against Darkrai, we're doing really well as well. So love Gallade, love Hitmonlee. It's the 3rd most played deck in the format, 52% win rate, and I have it 8 on my list as sort of the 8th highest win rate so far of this format. So love Gallade, and I think, honestly, it could go down in win rate if Mewtwo continues to see more play, but Gyarados is also on the rise. So Gallade is in this really interesting spot where it struggles against top decks, but also does really well against top decks. So shout out to Gallade. Next up is actually going to be Executor and Meowscarada. So one thing that we're going to take a look at here is that a lot of these grass decks, especially Meowscarada decks, have tremendous win rates. Meowscarada is just a very, very good card. In fact, I think the only thing really holding back Meowscarada is that it's not necessarily, it's running a lot of evolution Pokemon, right? Whether we're pairing it with Executor or Beedrill. So it has its consistency issues. No matter what you kind of slice it, it just does have a little bit of a less consistent, pathway as some of these decks running only basic Pokemon. But Meowscarada, super, super strong. Executor is still one of the strongest Pokemon in the game. So they pair together really, really well. This is actually the 10th most played deck of this format so far. 207 wins and 188 losses, 3 ties. So a much smaller sample size than something like a Gallade, but still a pretty decent sample size, and this deck is doing really, really well. I actually really like Meowscarada. The more I play against it, especially when I'm playing Mewtwo in ranked battles, it absolutely terrifies me. If Meowscarada gets set up, here, let's pull up the deck list. If Meowscarada gets set up early on, like if it's turn 3 and that Meowscarada's on the board, there's really not much many decks can do because we're doing such early damage for really no drawback for only 2 energies. Or even if we don't have Meowscarada set up, we can have Executor set up. And this deck has a really awesome pathway to where, again, if we do get a little bit lucky in drawing those Pokemon, we could technically go Meowscarada into a second Meowscarada and then finish the game with Executor. Very, very dangerous line. Tons of HP here. We're running Ericas, we're running Giant Cape. Just not much that most decks can do to really get through that many Pokemon with that high HP. So I really love Meowscarada in a lot of different decks. I still think Executor is maybe, it might be the best option in some ways, in some matchups, but as we're going to see later in this video, there is another Grass-type EX Pokemon that loves to be paired with Meowscarada and is doing tremendously well. So yeah, again, I think we've talked about Meowscarada quite a bit. It's probably my #1 most surprising, I guess, newcomer to Shining Revelry. I knew the card would be good, but I didn't know it would be that good. Again, I think that Giant Cape on Meowscarada at 160 HP, being immune to red because we're not an EX Pokemon, and doing 130 damage, potentially 150 with red, is just really strong, right? It's really nice to have red be able to go in your direction, but not, the opposite way. So it's not a threat, but we're able to utilize it in our deck list. So yeah, just a really, really great card. Again, I was talking about those consistency issues, but Sprigatito does have Cry for Help. So in a scenario where we lead with Sprigatito and we're going second, then we can get at least one of those Cry for Helps off. Again, thin the deck out a little bit, find some more Pokemon. Again, the only issue here is that we don't really have that much room for some of those consistency cards like Iono or like Pokemon Communications. I think a lot of people are choosing to run, of course, Giant Cape and maybe some Ericas because in some matchups that healing can really make or break it. I will say this, when I'm playing Mewtwo, it can be really frustrating because if I know that even if I can't take the KO on an Executor or a Meowscarada, with Mewtwo, I can use that 2 energy attack and do 50 damage to maybe set up a KO next turn, but those Ericas healing up, those grass Pokemon kind of nullify that 50 damage from Mewtwo. So a very, very strong card. I think Ericas is still correct, but again, this deck does have a little bit of those consistency issues, even with Sprigatito's Cry for Help. Just a lot of evolution Pokemon, and you're always going to have to struggle through that sometimes. So I think that's the only thing really holding Meowscarada back. And this is our #7 deck. So if we go back here, 52% win rate, 207 wins, 188 losses. Really respectable, honestly, as the 10th most played deck of this format. So next up here at the #6 deck on our list is going to be Weavile and Darkrai. Weavile and Darkrai is actually the 7th most played deck of the format, so a bit of a larger sample size here. 398 wins, 344 losses, 8 ties, and that is a 53% win rate, which is actually really, really good. I think that Weavile Darkrai is actually on the rise. Realistically, again, I said the 7th most played deck of the format. It's actually right behind Mewtwo is so far as most played decks. This is just another high placing example. This deck is playing Dawn and a Potion. There's a lot of different flexibility. I know some people are running Team Rocket Grunt in their Weavile Darkrai list. I think that's a good inclusion as well. But I think it really comes down to, again, hitting Mewtwo, Giratina for weakness, very common cards in the format. We're very fast-paced, very aggressive, and I think that Weavile Darkrai is becoming even more well-positioned as time goes on because, again, I think Mewtwo and especially Giratina decks are on the rise. So I know that a lot of people are really high on Giratina and Darkrai, which, again, I think is probably the other top way to play Darkrai, but don't sleep on the, the fast, aggressive Turbo Dark deck. In fact, I think for this upcoming weekend's Ursa Days tournament, we'll see that this might actually be as good of a meta choice as really any in the format right now. One Sabrina, I will say that maybe 2 Sabrina for that early game Sabrina play could be really useful, especially against things like Gyarados or even Meowscarada. So, 2 Cyrus, 1 Sabrina, maybe 2 Sabrina is correct. Again, a lot of things we can swap around with this deck list as the format evolves. Maybe we change some of those ancillary trainer cards, but really, really fun. Really, really fun deck, and a deck that I think is becoming increasingly actually more well positioned. So 53% win rate is very good for the sample size. The 7th most played deck, I wouldn't be surprised if it really rises back up. I think it deserves to see more play, and I think that it's going to be even better in the upcoming weeks. I really do think that. So yeah, Darkrai is just super good. We can talk about Darkrai, but I think everybody knows how strong Darkrai is as an EX Pokemon, potentially the strongest in the game right now, right? I mean, if you kind of look at the whole package, right? Giratina is of course really good, but Darkrai is right up there as definitely one of the strongest EX Pokemon in the entire game. So yeah, there it is. Number 6 on our list, 53% win rate. Next up is going to be Giratina and Darkrai. So this is the number 1 most played deck of the format. And again, this is where, win rates don't always mean everything. Whenever a deck is seeing a lot more play than all of the other decks, meaning it's by far the number 1 most played deck, and again, 1,673 wins, 1,380 losses, right? So the win rate here is very substantial if you really look at how large of a sample size this is. But the one thing you have to keep in mind is that these ties here don't count for wins, right? So when you look at this sort of win rate, you kind of add the losses to the ties, and that's kind of how this percentage goes. So the reason why we see so many ties, but also why the win rate is probably going to fall closer to 50%, is because this is the most played deck. And here I'll pull up the example. Because this is the most played deck, it actually ends up playing itself in tournaments more often, right? Which means that no matter what that happens, when this deck plays another person playing this deck, it's going to be 50%. The outcome will be 50%, right? Because that's a win and a loss. So basically, the more that people play decks, the more commonly they fall towards 50%. That's just how the data goes. But for this deck to have a 54% win rate as the number 1 most played deck by a wide margin is actually really, really interesting. So this is just, again, an example of a top placing Giratina and Darkrai list recently. And we are playing one Flagrant Flower Shaman, which I actually think is really funny. It helps counteract other Darkrai decks to do some of that extra healing. I like it, honestly. Is it best? I don't know. I just thought this would be a pretty fun example. I've shown this maybe once or twice before. But again, very similar to the other Giratina decks, low amounts of Pokemon, which allows us to kind of tech in a lot of different options here. We can play 1 Leaf, 1 Mars, and we can play 2 copies of Red. I do think that 2 Giant Cape and 1 Rocky Helmet is correct in this list, as it is in Mewtwo as well. Again, this deck is going to probably remain as the most played deck. Again, I might have some, sort of play in that. This was a deck that I made a video on day 1, so I think a lot of people just understand that it's really popular, and I think that, Druddigon's an interesting scenario because it kind of, you would think that it doesn't work well in this deck because it kind of, turns off, your prize race, right? Like in a scenario where, when, Druddigon gets KO'd, they only have to KO 1 more EX Pokemon to win the game. So do we really want to play Druddigon? But honestly, I think we do in a lot of scenarios because things like Darkrai and Druddigon can really set up the KO. Darkrai with Giant Cape's 160. So there's not a lot of decks that can both go through Druddigon and Darkrai without taking too much damage that they just lose the game. One example that I think this deck actually does lose against pretty significantly is actually against Mewtwo for a variety of different reasons, but Mewtwo can hit above that 160 threshold, which I think is really important with Red. So when you're playing Mewtwo and Giratina up against this deck, you can kind of just be a bit passive, and then just, hopefully when you're leading Giratina, you can just get 4 or 3 energies on both Giratina and Mewtwo, KO that Druddigon, and then they KO Giratina, and then Mewtwo KOs them. And that's really sort of how that flow goes. Whoever kind of KOs Druddigon first typically ends up winning that game. So I think it's just a really interesting interaction. But no, I think that this list actually kind of does lose to Mewtwo. Again, we'll have to see. So today we're talking about just decks with the highest win rate. But tomorrow what I'm actually going to do is we're going to talk about matchup data and and counterplays in the format. So this video is just about the highest win rate decks, and then tomorrow we're going to talk about what decks are best against the top decks of the format, what matchups certain decks struggle with. So we're going to go into all of that matchup data tomorrow, and hopefully these 2 videos are informative enough and useful enough to help us, in this next, second week of ranked battles, but also in the Today's week, Pocket Weekly coming up this weekend, which I'm really excited about. But anyway, Giratina, Darkrai, an extremely strong deck, by far the number 1 most played deck of this format so far, with a 54% win rate, is absolutely incredible. Do not sleep on this deck. It is certainly a top 3 deck, top 2 potentially deck, I think, in the format right now. Maybe even number 1. I don't have it number 1, but it certainly could be number 1 if it sees that much play. So yeah, shout out to Darkrai and Giratina. So next up is going to be Gyarados. So Gyarados is a very interesting one, but I have been constantly surprised by how well Gyarados is doing. So just barely a higher win rate than Giratina and Darkrai at 54.14%. And it has 1,171 wins, 956 losses, and 36 ties. This is the number 2 most played deck of the format, quite a little bit behind Giratina and Darkrai in terms of how many people are playing this deck, but very consistently has remained in the top 2, top 3 most played decks. And I am always just very scared to go up against Gyarados because it really is just such a powerful Pokemon. Of course, it does have its consistency issues. Here is a deck list example. Again, a lot of people I think now are questioning, should we be playing, Giant Cape instead of Rocky Helmet in Gyarados, right? It helps you in a lot of scenarios. It can give Magikarp above 30 HP to live hits from Hitmonlee. It can bring Manaphy above 50 HP to live an attack from like a Sudowoodo, or not a Sudowoodo, but like a Skarmory, or maybe like a Mewtwo attack, right, for 50 damage. So Giant Cape is definitely really useful in Gyarados, but the thing is, we're kind of very reliant on those Rocky Helmets and Red as well to do that additional damage modifying to kind of hit that breakpoint, right, of being above 140. 140 is still a bit of an awkward number for Gyarados. Not a lot of Pokemon are going down to 140, especially with Giant Cape so popular in the format. So Rocky Helmet really does sort of help fix that math along with Red. So if you are swapping out Rocky Helmet for Giant Cape, there's a lot of knockouts that you're just not going to be able to do. And I think that is definitely sort of a breakpoint for Gyarados. We kind of have to be able to take 1-hit KOs or else the deck just doesn't really function. And I honestly, that's sort of how I feel about Gyarados. But no, 54.14% win rate as the second most played deck of the format. No surprise to me. Honestly, with Irida coming out last set, Red coming out this set to further boost the damage of Gyarados, I just think that it has really everything going for it. It's always been one of the strongest Pokemon. Water type has so much support. We still have Misty, so technically you could still be facing down, a 4 energy, max HP, Gyarados on turn 2. So keep that in mind. That is still something that can happen with this deck. It is an evolution Pokemon. We're not playing Irida, we're playing Iono rather, but we are playing one copy of Pokemon Communication. So to give the deck a little bit more consistency, I don't know if the standard Gyarados deck will change, if the 20 card list will change, like I said, with Rocky Helmet, Giant Cape. But for now, this is the list that I did the best last week, and I think the most common version of Gyarados that we're seeing. And I do think that it is probably correct for the most part. But again, as the meta shifts, maybe the way that we're playing Gyarados and the cards we're playing in this deck change. But Gyarados is absolutely incredible. One of the strongest Pokemon in the game, if not the strongest overall Pokemon in the game. Still a very, very strong deck. Just over 54% win rate is honestly no surprise to me. I think Gyarados is absolutely incredible. And this is, I think, number 4 on our list. So the real number 3 deck here on our list for highest win rates is actually Rampardos with Hitmonlee. Now, this is a smaller sample size. This is actually the 15th most played deck of the format. So out of all of the decks that we have talked about today, this is definitely the smallest sample size. 121 wins and 97 losses, 4 ties. Now, the thing with Rampardos and Hitmonlee is that I think that it's got all of the same things going for it that Rampardos and Lucario does, except now, again, with so much Gyarados in the format, I think it's really important to be playing Hitmonlee as our lead. So let's take a look at the deck list example. One thing you'll note here, of course, is that there's no Fighting Coach Lucario, which, again, means that we're not able to do that additional damage boost with things like Marshadow or Rampardos. But again, I think that the substitution of Lucario for Hitmonlee and Farfetch'd gives us a lot more stronger options in the early game. Hitmonlee is super well positioned with so much Gyarados seeing play, but also these Draudigon decks with Giratina seeing a lot of play as well. So I think Hitmonlee is very correct, and I do think that it makes Rampardos actually a better deck. Now, the Rampardos and Lucario deck is seeing a lot more play still. It's the 5th most played deck of the format, but it has a 49% win rate, so a much lower win rate than a deck like this does. And I do honestly think that Hitmonlee in Rampardos is actually more correct, and that's just kind of how I feel. I think that now with the inclusion of Red, I don't think we really need that boosted damage from Lucario as much as we would rather just have Hitmonlee see play. Now, of course, some decks can just play around Hitmonlee, right? They can just not put down a bench Pokemon for the first couple of turns. But one thing you got to understand is that a lot of these Giratina decks kind of rely on benching that Pokemon, right? Whether Giratina is in the active spot or, Darkrai's in the active spot, they need both of them on the board at the same time, and a Mewtwo does as well, right? They need both of those Pokemon on the board at the same time so that they can build them both up together, which allows us to then at least have a target early on with Hitmonlee. So a lot of the top decks in the format can't really play around it. It's the same, again, with the Manaphy decks, where they need Manaphy in the active, and then they have to bench Magikarp, right, to accelerate those energies to it. So Hitmonlee is very, very good in the format right now. Rampardos is still incredible. 130 is very, very good. Again, with that additional damage that we're getting from the, Stretch Kick Hitmonlee, or, the early damage from Farfetch, plus Red, we can hit for 150. So Rampardos should still be taking KOs very easily, even without Fighting Coach Lucario. And again, 1 energy in the attack cost means that we can more reliably go like, Hitmonlee, Rampardos, but still have Marshadow ready to go. Again, we could go Hitmonlee into Marshadow and then into Rampardos, but we're playing only single price Pokemon, so the order here doesn't actually matter as much as it does like with Gallade. where in this scenario, we can actually go like Hitmonlee, Rampardos, and then finish with Marshadow. Gallade can't do that because Gallade is worth 2 prizes, right? So you kind of have to go Hitmonlee, Marshadow, Gallade. This deck, you don't have to technically. If Rampardos is ready by turn 3 or turn 4, you can just go ahead and go into it. I think that does give the deck a little bit more flexibility. As well, we're playing fossils, which means that we're guaranteed to not start with a fossil Pokemon in the active spot, which means it's probably going to be Hitmonlee or Farfetch'd, which again gives the deck a little bit more consistency. So yeah, I think that Hitmonlee, Rampardos, I know it's a smaller sample size, like I said here, the 15th most played deck, only 121 wins and 97 losses, but 54.5% win rate is still impressive. I would like people to maybe be playing this version of Rampardos more than the Lucario version. Again, the Lucario version has a lot larger of a sample size, but it has a negative win rate, so keep that in mind. I do think Rampardos is still a really strong player in the format, but I don't know if it's going to end up seeing as much play as Gallade does. And I think if people are playing that Hitmonlee Marshadow package, I think they're most commonly going to play it with Gallade. But, you know, like I said, we're not getting hit for weakness on Psychic Pokemon. So keep that in mind. Giratina can't actually KO Rampardos, right? No matter how you slice it. So keep that in mind. Very strong card. Very strong deck. And I wanted to include Rampardos because, again, that win rate is really substantial, even though the sample size is maybe a little bit smaller than the others. So anyway, let's get into our top 2. So our number 2 highest win rate so far in the format is going to be... Yes, it's actually Mewtwo and Giratina. I know some people thought this would maybe be number 1, but it has actually gotten overtaken by another deck of a smaller sample size, but actually still a higher win rate. Giratina and Mewtwo EX is incredible. So 500, this is actually the 6th most played deck of the format, but take a look at this win rate here. 56.2%, 511 wins, 384 losses. So as far as any decks that are sort of higher up in terms of seeing play, this is by far the most successful from a win rate perspective. Very great win rate here. And again, yes, the 6th most played deck of the format. Here's one example. Now, one thing I will say with this deck, and I've talked about it so much over the last few days, you can change around these trainer cards a ton. I think that 2 red is kind of needed. I personally think that 2 Giant Cape, 1 Rocky Helmet is also needed. And yes, I do think that Pokemon Center Lady and Potions is really good in the format right now because we're seeing so much Darkrai. So being able to nullify some of that early chip damage from Darkrai's ability is really important. It can be the difference between you surviving an attack later on or not. So I've been playing 2 Potion, 1 Pokemon Center Lady in my deck. I think 1 copy of Leaf is also really good. It has won me a lot of games. And I think that, honestly, you could even justify playing 2 copies of Leaf. Mars is really good. It's just really consistent hand disruption. This deck loves to play into the late game, so Mars is a really good card here. You could substitute Mars out for something like a Giovanni, which is what I've been doing to help me a little bit more in those Meowscarada matchups. But overall, I think this list is really close to being pretty perfect currently in this format. And I've made a video, I think yesterday we did ranked battles with this deck. This is just a phenomenal deck. It's been carrying me quite literally through ranked battles. And it did win the Ursa Days tournament. Got first place last week, and since then has been seeing an incredible amount of play. It will likely rise up to be a top 3, top 4 deck in play rate. Mewtwo is just super good. The breakpoints all work out between Red and Giant Cape. Not a lot that a lot of decks can do for Mewtwo, being able to hit for 170 with 170 HP. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about Mewtwo. I've already spent a lot of time discussing this deck. It's a deck that I'm personally very high on. Again, you can change around these additional, supporter cards and trainer cards really in a lot of different ways, depending on what the format looks like right now, but I think this list here is still a very good baseline to be going off of. And yes, the 2nd highest win rate out of any of the decks in the top 10, and very strong. Very good. Very good. If this wins Ursa Days again, or if it places extremely well, this might remain as my S tier pick on my tier list, which again, it was this week. But we'll have to see. I'm really curious to see sort of the data and all of the, the results from the Ursa Days tournament. So yeah, stay tuned for all of that in the upcoming weeks. So, okay, so now let's get into it. Our number 1 highest win rate deck in this video. This might surprise you. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it does. Number 1 on our list is going to be Meowscarada and Beedrill. So again, a smaller sample size here, 176 wins, 126 losses. This is the 11th most played deck of the format. And this deck has a 57% win rate. So pretty incredible. I've actually seen this list quite a bit in ranked battles, if I'm being honest with you, but I know it's a smaller sample size, but 57% is absolutely incredible. Let's take a look here at the deck list. So very similar to the Executor list, except now because Beedrill is a stage 2 Pokemon, we're not playing 2 copies of that evolution line, we're only playing 1. Definitely a more of a focus around Meowscarada, but we still have the 2 Ericas, we still have the 1 Giant Cape. The only difference now is because we're playing 3 Pokemon in the Beedrill line as opposed to 4 Pokemon in the Executor line, we have room to play that awesome Team Rocket Grunt, which again pairs really well with Beedrill, especially if we flip a couple heads in the early game, go into Beedrill in the late game. We're really kind of putting a lockdown on our opponent. So I think this deck has a lot going for it. Again, I will say that it is a bit of an RNG based deck. It's just it's a list here that does require you to draw into your Pokemon, maybe hit an early Team Rocket Grunt. So it's a bit of a high roller list here, but to be fair, if you do draw into all of the Pokemon at least somewhat early, there's really nothing that most decks can do here. Just the combo is absolutely insane. If you do go Meowscarada into Beedrill, it's game over. I mean, your opponent literally can't keep up with that. So much damage, so much energy removal, so much HP, especially with Ericas and Giant Cape. This deck really, I think its high end might be at the highest of it of any deck in the format. Again, it's going to have its consistency issues because, again, we're playing, 3 basic Pokemon, and I think it is 6 evolution Pokemon. So that ratio is definitely a bit tough. No matter what, we're going to have some consistency issues here, but if you do draw into all of those Pokemon correctly, I think you just win, and there's really nothing that your opponent can do here. So I do expect this list to see a lot of play. I think Meowscarada in general will likely see a large increase in play, but these Grass-type decks have insane win rates. They really do, and at 57.14%, this is the highest win rate deck right now. Again, a smaller sample size, but the highest win rate deck right now in Pokemon TCG Pocket of this format, which is really a surprise to me. 2 brand new, Pokemon, some newcomers to Shining Revelry, a set that a lot of people thought was underwhelming, is in fact extremely strong. So yeah, I would love to see Meowscarada and Beedrill see more play. But again, don't put too much weight into the win rates. I do think that this data is very interesting. Some of these sample sizes are larger than others, so again, keep that in mind. I try to call that out in this video, but yeah, there it is, guys. My top 8 win rates amongst the top decks of the format currently so far. Again, as time goes on, maybe we'll do an updated video and we'll see how things change, which again, they definitely will. But I thought this video might be interesting for you guys, so hopefully you guys enjoyed it. And again, today and tomorrow, I'm going to put out maybe some informative sort of data-driven videos to help us get a better idea of maybe what's best, again, leading into week 2 of Ranked, but also the Ursa Days tournament this weekend. I just want to go ahead and help you guys out as early as possible. But again, I'm really fascinated by the data. I follow it, and it's really fun for me to do so. So hopefully you guys also enjoyed. Yeah, let's wrap this up here. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. A ton of you guys have been watching, and I really, really do appreciate that. And I'm glad that you guys have enjoyed the content. So, hitting that subscribe button really does mean a lot to me. And again, comment below, what decks do you think maybe should have been on this list, of course? Like, what are you surprised of decks that weren't on the list? Honestly, what we could do in another video is talk about the decks that are underperforming very massively. I will just sort of say off the top of my head, things like Arceus and Dialga have very low win rates and seeing a lot of play. Things like Charizard, again, always having a low win rate, but seeing a lot of play. And then Articuno. Articuno 18 Trainer, seeing a lot of play, but a very, very poor win rate, about 48%. So there's a couple sleeper decks in here that you would think would be higher, but really just aren't. And again, Rampardos and Lucario was another one, decks that are just sort of underperforming, which I think is definitely an interesting thing to look at as well. But yeah, so there it is. Let me know if you like this video. But tomorrow we're going to talk more about specific matchups and interactions between the top decks. So stay tuned for that. That should be a good one as well. And yeah. Peace out, guys. Have a good one. We'll see you guys next time. And yeah, bye.